Club isn't the best place to find a lover, so the bar is where I go. Me and my friends at the table doing shots, drinking fast, and then we talk slow. You come over.
Today, under the agricultural entrepreneurship, we'll be discussing about some backgrounds about the Asia-Pacific trade policies on the trade policies, for us to be able to understand the agricultural entrepreneurship context of the chapter. Now, in the developing countries, the market for agri-food products are changing at a pace that is unparalleled in modern history. This trade history becoming increasingly open and homogenized towards international standards. Now, new distribution channels dominated by larger firms are imposing higher performance demands even, including social and environmental standards. And that is true towards throughout the value chain. And then traditional ways of doing business are often no longer adequate, although resulting in new challenges for small and medium farms even, and then acquiring the technical know-how and the financial resources to incorporate standards such as the quality assurance, safety and traceability, and it's difficult and a large failure to do so. So marginalizes many small and medium farms and agro enterprises. Now, the public institutions that could traditionally provide support to farmers have steadily eroded and are now often non-existent even. So, until the late 1980s, wherein rural development was typically state-focused, and with public institutions controlling the systems and infrastructure for agri market inputs and outputs. Now, these institutions were, for the most part, unceremoniously scrapped as their shortcomings became evident as years progresses. Now, free market theories became prominent at the time, and then the structural adjustment took hold as a result. Now, their role in supporting smaller, more marginalized, or remote producers, however, was important in facilitating equitable access to information and markets. Consequently, their absence in poorer regions has exacerbated market failures and left a vacuum for not is often adequately filled by the private sector even. Now, through the lenses of value chain theory and institutional economics, we are now beginning to better understand the interrelationship of, of the private sector, agricultural production, and trade with the emerging processes of civil governance. So it goes hand in hand altogether with these two partnerships. Now, from such understanding can emerge the necessary innovation and support required to provide sustainable solutions to the challenges of necessary capacity building or long-term financing that is required by smaller farmers and rural entrepreneurs altogether. Now, who want to participate in the value chain, that is important, connecting with one another. Now, without effective public and civic institutions, the availability of smaller farms and enterprises to participate is now being reduced. Now, we further discuss and try to understand the new developments affecting agricultural producers' market access. Now, due to the improved logistics and faster communication, information technology is coming in, and fewer trade barriers worldwide, markets are increasingly open as well as increasingly homogenized towards international standards. So the access is now freely being open to the world. And then large farming systems are incorporating greater skills and more investment in technology and infrastructure uh, to enable more controlled and large-scale production, and that is difficult for smaller farmers to achieve due to economic reasons. The new market access challenges faced by smaller farmers do not apply just to exports, since national or internal markets are beginning to imitate international standards even. And then, as part of a shift in the structure of distribution channels, away from the small local markets towards, for example, supermarkets is a very good example of what we're referring to here. Because supermarkets typically produce or procure steady supply and large volumes of products from suppliers. Now, for the small farms to enter into a supermarket procurement uh, may require heavy capital and technological investment and knowledge of the retailing concept also, no, as well as more skilled labor force even. Now, agricultural standards may play an important role in these procurement systems. Now, often, farmers simply cannot meet these standards on their own. And arrangements such as in contract farming are one way to resolve the uneven relationships between many small suppliers and a few large buyers. So now it's happening actually. I've seen a lot of stores, small stores or small market producers that are farmers rather, that are now reliant to the third party middleman. And the middleman is the one who's killing the market actually, because the farmer simply doesn't have any resources to go to and supply bigger supermarkets. So that is the reality right now. Now, agricultural standards evolve over the course of many years, and were in essence codified publicly by regular accepted use. But the last decade, has seen dramatic changes. New and often private standards are demanded by buyers in order to meet their value chain management needs, or if I may say, reduce their exposure to risk. Now, how standards drive developments in the global agricultural or agri-food system is intimately linked with functions of governance within the value chain. So that is, conditions for participation in the chain are set. And then after setting, it is implemented. And after the implementation, it is being monitored and enforced fully. In the past, these rules mainly dealt with meeting basic cost parameters and guaranteeing supply. Now, however, these, as outlined by the some of a lot of research that came in, standards have now become tools or products for product differentiation, and then playing new roles as strategic tools that are used for market penetration even. So and then safety, assurance, traceability, quality control, incorporation of social and environmental guidelines, and even the definition of product lines and niches are now being required even. And resulting for smallholders in the supply chain often lack the internal capacity and the economies of scale to establish effectively with quality assurance and traceability systems. Now, the small enterprises and producers, especially sectors that are export dependent, may be marginalized unless they can make standard compliance that is cost effective and guaranteeing traceability for the buyers. Okay? Now, what about the global developments driving new trade processes? Now, today, because there is great exposure and public risk when standards fail to maintain food safety, or when they permit social and environmental harm, they are driving a number of new processes such as the hazard analysis and the critical control point, no, and the sustainability standards such as the organics are part of the system right now. Now, the globalization of these value chains and the enormous volumes and the concentrations of a buyer can mean the power of the buying, the buyers can mean dramatic consequences for thoughts, or even millions of people can be affected. No, so that's scary, but like mad cow disease, so that's very scary. Or yeah, and these things have demonstrated how failure of standards can cripple an entire subsector, even across developed nations such as America, the UK, and the US, even Japan. And not only firms but also governments and consumers are increasingly concerned about these global developments. Okay? Uh, right. Now, this concern is being progressively actually translated as higher requirements for market entry. So farmers are now beginning to, having second thoughts of how, or these things, are agricultural product can penetrate even the higher level markets. And for example, there are the ethical standards of doing business, and then the fair trade act, or the fair trade in the industry. Yeah, that's it. Organic products, etc. And these requirements are being driven by changes in in three major areas. So what are these three major areas of changes? So number one, a new consumer environment. So meaning it is characterized by a prominent interest in personal health and increasing doubt in the ability of government to ensure food safety. And this includes broader concerns such as unchecked chemical use in livestock even, and we see a lot of that in the news, the unethical practice of having untrue to their product that are being imported and exported. Yes, now, so chemical use in livestock, antibiotic resistance to humans even, as a result. Uh, and then the increased transparency and communication has led to a more information and greater concern about the social and environmental conditions in the place of origin. Now, a new business environment. So is number two, no, for for our concern about this. Now, in the agri-food business, an increasing concentration of suppliers, intermediaries, and retailers stimulates new methods of differentiation and spur a more intense drive for new supply sources and greater efficiencies in cost and logistics. Um, as global corporations face new risks, they adopt various risk management techniques, especially the demand for more standards. And yeah, and that is true in most researchers that are coming in, and also these are requiring nodes that are setting standards that are above minimum levels and requiring a third-party certification even, and traceability are a corporate response to risk management. Okay? Okay. Um, if I may, would like to share in one of the research, one of the world's most prominent medical association warned of the dire human health consequences of increasing resistance to antibiotics in the US, where only 12% of all antibiotics are used for human, and the remaining 88% are routinely fed in intensive livestock operations. Well, that is coming from the New England Journal of Medicine, published in 1999. Okay? Now, number three is a new regulatory environment. Now, as more and more food is traded globally, all governments struggle to monitor and manage the safety of their food supplies, typically by imposing new barriers to entry in the form of public standards, including import bans to manage a variety of livestock diseases, or stiffer border inspections for contamination and phytosanitary violations. Now, in some cases, government resort to regulation, strict regulation, in fact, such as in the U.S., bioterrorism laws are being crafted and introduced, and the EU, the European Union's maximum residue level or GMO restriction for the livestock coming in. Now, these three environments uh, have combined to stimulate the evolution of numerous standards. As public standards have multiplied, so have those mandated by private industry even. Now, since 1985, actually, so more private international food related standards have emerged. And then clearly standards have become an important competitive factor and are becoming an important determinant of access to market. No? Okay, so there. Now another one is the standards increasingly set the rules of the game. No? So it's really harder for the agricultural business right now, being setting entrepreneurial mindset in the safetyness of your product. Now, standards offer quality and safety assurance, as well as differentiate and define product categories. What does it mean? So, meaning, in addition to food safety, taste, cosmetic quality, and nutritional value, they increasingly involve a process requirement such as the environmental impact, the worker health and the safety, the animal welfare, the fairness to primary producers. In some cases, suppliers are required to provide reasonable assurance of social and environmental benefits that range from an international organization for standardization, ISO, now that we series to that we know of. Now, such requirements can either facilitate market penetration or act as a barrier to entry because you do not simply comply or fail to the standards being required by these companies or yeah, organization. Now, understanding and meeting them is becoming even a challenge to every stakeholders. Now, as incomes grow, so does the tendency to consume perishable foods such as meat products, dairy products, aquatic products that are more susceptible to conveying life-threatening diseases. And they're very strict about it. Even quarantine is to be being provided in the inspection process. Now, this tendency may be fueled by greater communication and trade influencing consumption. Patterns resemble those of the U.S. and the European consumers. No? So they have very high standards of requirement as far as health is concerned. Now, okay, no? So these are very critical actually. So concomitantly, governments have become more sensitive to agriculture, safety, as scares from ranging from avian flu, impact to human health and wreaking havoc in some regions even, worldwide even. And this shift will mean more pressure on producers and processors to comply. So you could just imagine the predicaments of the farmers and the agricultural entrepreneurs. And many enterprises are not simply prepared not to just took that rather drastic changes. Now, in the People's Republic of China, which is part of our regional jurisdiction, where the majority of the processors are small and medium enterprises, just like the Philippines even, the SME that we call it, the total number of processors have shrunk by two-thirds in the past decades, as food processing has shifted from the traditional lower risk products to meat, dairy, and aquatic products, and horticultural produce that require higher standards and greater investments. Okay? Now, standards take different forms. They may be set in commercial legal codes and subject to fines if transgressed. They may be even internationally recognized and widely used even though they have no specific legal basis, or they may be private, firm-specific requirements. And standards can be enforced by the participants within the chain, as well by external agencies. Now, from within the chain, the key sanction is excluding a supplier from participating. Now, the converse of this is that well-performing suppliers can be favored with long-term contracts and higher prices. And then sanctions may also be exercised outside the chain, and many governments have extensive bureaucracies checking compliance with the important sanctioning force. Now, boycotts and publicity campaigns, or the threat of them, have also forced many leading firms to change the way they produce or to delist particular suppliers out of dangers, of closing shops eventually. What is common to a value chain is the increasing concentration of power among a few actors. No? So when you say actors, so these are the leading, players and of the supply chains, and it has led to the increased horizontal and vertical coordination even. So everybody's affected now. The considerable purchasing power of large-scale retailers in particular enables them to set private standards that are typically diverse and can be confusing at times, and are always more demanding than the public safety standards of most countries. Since standards can be influenced considerably by both public and private sectors, now producers and processors of agricultural products have to serve many masters. No? So they have to conform with all the requirements of those who needs it. Now, another good example is that the world's largest grocery retail markets by value are now the USA, Japan, and PRC. No? So the People's Republic of China, India, and the United Kingdom. And by this year, 2020, the People's Republic of China is expected to more than double its value and move into second place. All these markets share development characteristics, which is defined by the nature of their distribution channels. Today, the retail food industry increasingly resembles the definition of a classic oligopolistic industry. The oligarchs, those who have the money. At the top are the large multi-unit retailers that tend to dominate consumer food distribution in many countries. So that's the danger. Actually, if you're small players, you cannot cope up with the changing economic conditions and the threat of these giants coming in. And I've seen that very good example. For example, in the farmers down south, even upper north, Luzon, Visayas, and Mindanao. So in the Philippine context. Now, for example, in the US, the top 5 supermarket chains accounted for over 40% of retail food sales in 2000. While in 1993, they accounted for 20%. So if you just imagine, so they're from 40 down to 20. In France, during the same period, the top 5 chains increased market share from 48 to 61%, while the neighboring country, France to Italy, it more than doubled from 11 to 25%. That is from the Bush and Bain 2004 research. Now, the largest are powerful multinational and include the US-based Walmart, with more than 5,000 mostly hypermarket type stores. Here, we can relate that to SM chain, the Ayala stores, and all day is now becoming a hypermarket or something like that. So, but SM is still the one to beat, especially in the context of the retail market in our country. Now, there, Walmart with more than 5,000 mostly hypermarket stores. And then France, they have Carrefour, for France, with more than 11,000 stores of varying formats. So yeah, it makes them exciting by presenting different formats in the different countries and in different locations. Now, stores of there, Netherlands has Royal Ahold and more than 5,000 supermarkets. Now, as a reference, their annual revenue is greater than the total value of any country's agricultural sectors. Walmart revenues, for example, top 300 US dollars billion, and its international sales exceeded 70 billion in 2006. What does it tell us? Such dominant players are the major drivers behind the staggering global flow of commodities, products, information, and finance that coordinate the activities of hundreds of millions of farmers and affecting billions of consumers. So that is how it evolved, no, in this context of economic activity. Now, producers and SMEs face difficult hurdles. How? Because developing country producers and SMEs face a number of hurdles to participate effectively in the higher trade, in the higher value trade even. In one article that was published by Hazel in 2004, they referred to as the often stated need for better infrastructure and linking to markets and credit among others. No? And notes that nonetheless, these still do not sufficiently address the problems of compliance with the increasingly complex standards environment. Now, the project effectiveness reviews for the countries of the Africa, the Caribbean, and the Pacific countries, no, signatories of the Lomé Convention. They're looking for quality and conformity in the fruit and vegetable subsector. So it is important and take note about this development. Take note that the private standards present formidable technical barriers that have a negative effects on smallholders, exporters, and even select only the best performing smallholders to be organized into a group. No? So they are now more selective about, in conformance to the quality standards. And these are expected to manage the food safety and traceability systems. Now, in addition to the high cost of certification, there is evidence that weaker farmers are often excluded. So, it's it's not really good story, to tell. But for example, there's in one African country, Zambia, they have the largest horticulture, and they are considered one of the largest exporters. And they limit themselves to source only one product from small holders producers, so limiting because of these restrictions. Now, the exporter fears that if the small holder cooperative cannot meet the required standards, so they may risk losing its global GAP certification, and that's dangerous. Now, institutional structures are necessary to achieve a form of vertical coordination that can overcome transactions and will cause a level that is costly, and the standards barrier that will cost to the smallholders even. Now, in the Philippines, as in the other countries, the growing popularity of contract hog farming allows feed millers to use smallholders' labor and land. Take note of that, and to fatten hogs at low cost even, so they get government support at that. Now, such small-scale livestock operations have thrived in many regional markets even, not only in the Philippines. And as that changes, the large-scale industry operations become even more dominant. And small enterprises without the support of the institutional structures, which is the government even, and some small players in the private sectors, and some other organizations are less likely to survive and dangers of closing. Now, we talk about the growth of the new distribution channel. So what are these? Now, the recent studies point to the shift in marketing channels available to producers and the rapid rise of the supermarkets in developing countries like us. No, and it's stated in the reference by Reardon 2005, Bingen and Bush in 2005, and Fulponi in 2005. Now, the 1990s saw the emergence of supermarkets as a major form of retailing in many developing countries, including the Philippines. Now, it has becoming dominant players in many countries, not only here in the Philippines, but Latin American countries with trend moving rapidly in the East and Southern Asia, including the Philippines, as I said, and more slowly in the South Asia. And this development is actually substantially transforming the nature and the competition and the composition of domestic agri-food commerce, as well as the regional and overseas trade. Okay, just a thought, no? So the supermarkets emerged in the U.S. and exploded in Latin America and Asia. So developments around the supermarket concept are representative of trends experienced in other multi-store retail formats. And the supermarket, self-serve, larger scale retailer, often with more than one checkout counter, emerged in the US about 75 years ago. So that was a long time already. And between 1925, prior to the war, and after the war, in 1955, supermarkets captured more than half of US grocery sales. By the 1980s, they have become the dominant food distribution channel across the United States. Today, Germany, the United Kingdom, and France show supermarket shares of food retail at 70 to 80%. And this business model, now refined, has emerged much more quickly than that of either the European Union or in the US, with strong implications for domestic and regional food suppliers. Okay. It is important to understand the effects of this market transformation, not only on producers and value chains, but also on the entire agri-food system. And because no, it affects cost and distributional issues from the farm to the table, farm to market to the table. With this larger trend, several important developments can be observed. So what are these? No? So probably number one is increasing demand for higher levels of farmer performance in terms of quality, process, and financial capacity to invest in technology and operating capital. And then another one is the greater centralization of retail procurement with the advent of the specialized, sophisticated multi-country logistic management, wholesaler replacing the traditional wholesalers. So I've seen that development. I was in the market in the 1980. So wherein the barcode is not yet common. So we do everything, inventory counting, against sales manually. So we do that. No? So right now, what you sell in the Visayas, in Mindanao, and in Luzon are now being counted in the central office by only using the barcode. No? So that is the centralization of retail procurement and marketing, sales, and everything. So there, no? So using the logistic management. See? So these are information technology even. Now, another one is the greater use of contracts and private systems to identify and reward preferred suppliers. So, yeah, the motivational factor, no, and then giving them incentive for the job well done. Now, the Asia region now represents barely a third of all the global food retail sales, and it is forecast to grow to about 41% of the global food retail markets by 2020. While Europe will comprise today, so there, and then Europe will comprise about 30%, and the NAFTA will shrink to 21%. So that is the international, the IGD calculations. Now, multiple stores rather, and retailers, no, of stores will be an important part of that loop, no, as they are growing fast throughout the world. And then particularly the liberalization of emerging markets and the foreign direct investments are a very good example of this. And this includes small-scale convenience stores, that are coming in. Convenience stores such as those associated with gasolines. So you've seen, no? So gasolines right now has a small convenience store, no, besides them. Gasoline stations rather. No? So convenience stores with gasoline stations. Supermarkets and full-service retailers such as hypermarkets. So they're now here. Okay? So I guess that would be the initial part of my lessons for our subject, the agricultural entrepreneurship. And this will give you somehow a background about what is happening, the legal bounds and the legal context of about the trade policy and growth in the Asia Pacific region and beyond. Okay, see you again in the next section. Thank you.